Now I just wanted to bring attention to this particular area of the underside of the turntable. So you don't have to take this part, you don't have to dismantle it to re-grease it, but what you'll need to do is work the mechanism around. So this is, just to pull back slightly, you can see this is towards the center, just above the cam. And this whole mechanism moves as the tone arm mechanism works during playback or at the end of a record. It is greased in between these plates and around the different shafts and so on that you see there. Now what I've done, I've already removed all the old grease and I've put some extra grease on here right now. And what I'm going to do is work the mechanism from underneath. So basically start the drive by pulling on one of the shafts, and then rotate the platter from underneath. So what you can see is that this will work the mechanism, and as you do this a few times, you'll work that grease in underneath the plates. So you don't need to actually dismantle it. Don't worry about it. Put a little extra, and then once you've done this a few times, any excess grease that's been pushed out and it's not where it needs to be, you can just remove that with a Q-tip and throw it away, and then the grease will be all left in the places where you need it. Okay, here is an item that I didn't mention in my initial list of materials that I use occasionally, and I'm going to use it in this particular case. You could probably use this in a number of places actually, or maybe anywhere, as a substitute for any other type of grease. But in this case, I'm going to use this one to lubricate the cam, the inner races of the tone arm cam, and I'm doing that for a couple reasons. Number one, I like the way that this it's easy to just shoot it in there, and you can control it to some degree where it goes, and get a good coating inside the cam, rather than trying to poke in regular grease in there. The other thing is that it tends to dry a little bit less sticky than other greases, so it's less likely to catch dirt and things like that, which could cause problems for you later. You don't need a lot of this stuff. You just need a little bit of a spray in there, and you're good to go. So I'll take a shot of that and give you an idea what it looks like when I'm done. So here you can see what it looks like after we're done. We've just sprayed some in here around excuse me, the faces of the cam races, or whatever you want to call them, in there. So you can see it's there. You just clean off any excess residue, and that sort of tends to mix around a little bit with that old graphite based stuff or whatever that is in there, and it seems to do okay. And again, if you have trouble with it later, it's really quite simple to clean it up and try something else. But I've had pretty good success with this and I think it'll work for most cases. So go ahead and use that one. Now there's one final that basically takes care of all of the underside of the turntable. So if you have a look, we've now re-greased all of the moving parts. Here again, this is the speed control mechanism going back into the actual gear, or the whatever you want to call it, that controls the drive for the idler wheel. It's all been re-greased. Your start-stop control mechanism, it's all been cleaned and redone, and all of the linkages that go along with that have all been cleaned as well. In some cases where you may not want grease, it's a tight fitting, you might want to, it's okay to put a little drop of oil or something underneath there. If you're concerned about it, may or may not be necessary, but you're not going to harm anything if you choose to do that. Again, all of this part is here. Now take note, this is the underside of the tone arm. There's no grease or oil as far as I can see anywhere in this mechanism, and that makes sense because if you do that, there's a greater likelihood that dirt will accumulate in there and gum up the the movement of the tone arm. So you don't want to actually lubricate anything in there. It's all really free moving, so you should have no issues in there at all. And then finally, the tone arm return mechanism that's driven by this assembly here. There's some sliding parts on there, and again, those have all been greased up underneath the washers and so on. And that's pretty much it. That's all you have to do underneath here. One thing to double check for later, again, this is your wiring, or your wiring connection from your tone arm. Make sure that your connections are all good and in place. It's really simple on there. So you can see, there's a good picture there in case anybody's looking for it. You've got a black all the way down on the bottom, red, white in those center areas there. You've got your green wire there, and then that yellow wire up at the top. Now that yellow, I've worked on a number of these, and the white wire, or sorry, the yellow wire does have a tendency to get knocked off, probably obviously because it's closest to the bottom, people taking it out, moving it around. That one has a tendency to get knocked off, and it's a ground wire actually, so really easy to fix. But now these wires are super thin, so if you do have to solder, what I found, it's almost impossible to strip the insulation off without breaking the wire. So you can, what I've done is burnt it off just with a lighter or something like that, just really quickly, to give me some exposed wire to solder. So just a little tip in case you have to do some soldering in there. If you try to strip it, almost guaranteed you are going to break it. Okay, now one final thing on the underside of this turntable you're going to do, so that you can access this if you look very, very carefully in here. We're going to just point my finger in here. So right in here, you'll see that is the bearing for the platter, and it's a...
No iPad.
Sorry, had an interruption there. So again, as you can see in here, you can see this is where the platter bearing is, and it actually you can see it from the top when you remove the platter, but there's a washer that sits right on top of there, and it's sort of locked into place, so it's actually a bit hard to access from the top to lubricate that bearing, and it's actually easier to do it from underneath the turntable. So usually this is unless you see a lot of dirt in there, you don't necessarily need to do a lot with it. I suppose you could, if there was a lot of dirt in there, you could spray air in there, or compressed air or something like that to blow it out, or even something like a degreaser or something like that to clean it first. Totally up to you. I know that this one, because I've looked at it already, is actually really clean and in good shape. So I am going to put a couple of drops of lubricant in there. Now what I use for that is I actually use this one. I know some people will have their own preferences again for doing. I often use this one, but in this case I'm going to use this one, which is again the one that I showed you. This is a synthetic lubricant that's supposedly for turntable bearings. I think it's probably just synthetic motor oil of some sort, but nonetheless I'm going to give this a try for this one. I am going to use this motor oil for the actual motor on this turntable a little bit later. And this is not your normal 3-in-1 oil, so not the red bottle that you'll see a lot, which has lots of solvents and different things in it. This is actually made for motors. You can see on here, and it's essentially a 20 weight oil. So you can see here 20 weight oil. I found this really good for turntable motors, and it says long lasting, and that's what I found. So I'm going to use that one as well a little bit later. Again, I didn't show this one in the beginning because I forgot about it, but I'll use that one as well. But in this case, I'm going to put a couple of drops of this one into the bearing. Again, a couple drops is plenty, and I think we'll be good to go. And I'm going to do that from the underside of the turntable just before I turn it back over. Yeah, that's all I got on this one.